guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast, and I'm here with my friend Autumn Ridenour. Autumn is an associate professor of Christian ethics at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. She is author of a number of books, including Sabbath Rest as Vocation, Aging Towards Death, which came out in 2018. I'd actually kind of love to have a conversation with you about that another time, Autumn. But her forthcoming book, Restlessness and Belonging, Augustinian Wisdom for the Digital Empire, is the one that I've invited her to talk with me about today, because it's something that I think is exceedingly relevant to many of the questions that I think all of us are asking in different ways, or in the case of some, and I'm slightly talking about myself here, burying our heads in the sand and pretending some of the things that are happening are not in fact happening. But just before we kick that off, Autumn, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself at a slightly more personal level beyond your academic position and your scholarly books?
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Well, it's a joy to be joining you today, so thank you for the invitation. And about myself, I'm originally from the South, or Kentucky, and I've moved to New England, been up here, I guess now, since graduate school, so almost 20-something years now. And we've had, my husband and myself, we have 3 boys, and it's a joy to be following the Lord and to be serving here in New England and to be serving the seminary. So that's kind of an overview of who I am. I don't know if you want to get into anything more distinctive.
For those who are avid listeners to the Confronting Christianity podcast, I first met Autumn through our mutual friend, Rachel Gilson, who I think has known you since Yale days. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So, yes, it was some time ago. It was really, I met Rachel when she was a 1-week-old Christian. And it was just a beautiful moment where she introduced herself and said, "Hello, I'm Rachel, and I'm a Christian." That's literally how she introduced herself to me. And I paused because I knew in that moment, oh, this isn't how we typically, and as believers, introduce ourselves. So I knew in that moment it probably was new. Yeah. And so I paused and I said, "Hi, I'm Autumn. I am too." And quite honestly, that moment to me encapsulates so much, because it really is the critical reality of who we all are in Christ. More than all of these things you just asked about myself, right? You just asked me, who am I? Tell me about yourself. Fundamentally, that's who I am. I'm Autumn, and I'm in Christ by His grace. I'm a Christian. So that's our primary identity. So it was a beautiful moment to meet her that way. And then we worshiped together, I guess, for 4 or 5 years. So it was a great season.
I hadn't heard that story. Another friend of mine who became a Christian a few years ago, when she first started coming to our church, she had a history of alcoholism. And so she'd been to multiple Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And, as we were going around in Bible study and people were saying, "Oh, hi, I'm so-and-so," she kept worrying that she had sort of said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic." Like this sort of had become this trigger. But interesting that Rachel's first impulse was to say, "Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm a Christian." I'm probably just still wrapping her mind around the fact that was true, and that everything had changed so dramatically in her life.
Yes, that's right.
Autumn, as you think back over the time since you were an undergrad, and I speak as someone who, when I first went to college, which was in the autumn of 1998, if I wanted to contact one of my friends, then there are a couple of ways I could do that. I could go and knock on their door. And if they weren't there, I could leave a note on their door, because we literally had, this makes me sound like I come from the dark ages. We left notepads stuck on our dorm room doors, so that if your friend came by when you weren't there, they could write a note. And I to this day have some of the sort of pads of that with various people's inscriptions of things that they'd said. You could leave a note in somebody's pigeonhole. So there was a mail room where you could go and put a letter, or you could put a note for a friend, or you could put a gift or something like that.
Right.
Or you could go to the computer room, and in the computer room, you could use a computer to send an email. That's not the world we live in anymore. And you have written a book that is about the exceedingly modern world that we're living in, and the digital age, but reflecting on the digital age with an ancient lens of the Bible and this strange theologian who is sometimes called St. Augustine.
That's
so
right.
Tell us a little, like, how did you even connect those dots originally? Like, what made you think I should write a book about our very modern world through the eyes of this 4th century theologian?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, there's a lot there, and a lot about how the world has changed even since we were studying similarly to you. When I was an undergrad, I was, more of an analog experience, at least writing and typing in the real world, though we had computers and things like that and email. So yes, why and how did I come about this topic? It really was in the process of teaching undergraduate students. And it was actually my first job after graduate school. I'd received my PhD, and maybe it's partially because I also had a kind of unofficial maternity leave woven in, where I'd taken some time. I'd taken really, if you'd say, 2 years off from teaching, because I had taught as a teaching fellow. Then I wrote my dissertation. I had like a year where I went and wrote my dissertation. I defended, had a child, our first child, which was a beautiful experience. But then I came into the classroom, and it was almost like I'd been 2 years out of the classroom. And so I entered in fall 2014, and I was teaching, and it was really the experience of being in the classroom and watching the shifts in what I perceived, if you go back to when we were undergrads, of students walking in the classroom, not having that kind of social conversations, not building what we would have had as like community in the classroom. We had to actually make efforts. I would just say for institutions now, higher ed, have to go make efforts to help build community sometimes outside of the classroom. Maybe that's not for every, university. And it was just watching students be more, how do I say this, motivated by the phones. We could put them away, but it was almost like our lives were now our phones, right? It changed the social dynamics. It's changed the learning experience. It changed all of these things. And of course now, so you start with the observation of the patterns that you feel that have shifted. And then you say, oh, well, it's not just the students. It's me. It's my family. It's my church. It's everywhere, right? And it was fascinating because really I kind of started reading about this as kind of just a hobby interest, so to speak. I would just find myself gravitating towards articles about tech because I just written a book on aging, death, and end-of-life ethics, and that was my main, research focus, and articles were coming out of that. But I started kind of looking at the tech articles, and it was then, I think 2017 was when Jean Twinge's iGen book came out. And of course, there are people agree and some people, critique some of the premises there. But her diagnosis of how when the iPhone came out, which I think was 2007, but then by 2012, she says, between 2012 and 2014, it became more of like a household item. And more people were using the iPhone. And of course, this would also be after social media apps had been created. So it was both the iPhone with the apps, and particularly social media, that you really began to see what Twenge and even Haidt would acknowledge, like these shifts, generational shifts in kind of adolescent behavior. But I would argue it's not just adolescent behavior. It was a cultural shift, right? Both, I would say, not just here in the US, but around the globe, of how we began to kind of be more tethered to the phone. And, you walk in a room and people are looking down. It's just everywhere you go, we're looking into these little black boxes or whatever you want to call it, looking into these screens. So it's really looking at the cultural shift.
Yeah. My 13-year-old takes the school bus to school every morning and back in the afternoon. And she says every single other child is on their phone the whole time. And she doesn't have a phone. So she's like sitting there like crocheting to sort of pass the time. But it's sad because it means that even though she doesn't have a phone, she can't actually talk to anybody because nobody is wanting to talk to her because they're all busy on their phones.
That's right.
Autumn, so that's helps me understand how you came to be interested in this digital age, both as a participant in it and as an observer of it. Why take out the long range zoom lens of a figure from church history to look at this?
A great question. Yeah. Why St. Augustine? And that's actually a wonderful question for today. And I don't know if the viewers will know, but today is actually Augustine's birthday.
Oh.
Yes. So technically it was November 13th. He was 354 was when he was born. But so it's a wonderful day to talk about him. But in church history. Why him? Well, he happened to be one of my major figures in my own reading and kind of theological trajectory, both I can think of reading him in undergrad, but then as a graduate student. So he informed a lot of my work on aging, death, and end of life. He was a major figure. So I was swimming in the ideas of Augustine. I was teaching at an Augustinian school. So I was encouraged regularly to think like Augustine with people, from the order of St. Augustine, which was a beautiful opportunity. But it was really thinking through that lens, going back in time with him, as he was a figure that I think really is integral to, if you call it Christianity and theology and the history of theology, but not just theology, philosophy, political thought and whatnot. But he was a man ahead of his age because he was thinking deeply about what it meant to be human. He was fundamentally what we call, his opening line to the Confessions, restless. And we'll get into looking at that restlessness in a little bit, but it was about looking at humans as motivated by desire. And I found that really tracked well with what I was considering what it meant to be social creatures, right, in the 21st century, that are tethered to our phones, that are also creatures longing for desire and for Augustine, the sense of restlessness. Our hearts are restless till they find rest in you, because, you made us for yourself. We are restless. It's this longing to be known. It's the longing. It's fundamentally a social idea that we are creatures made for relationship. Yep. And so the phone is hacking that, or not just the phone, but social media apps in particular, right, are hacking that and or drawing on that innate desire to be known, to relate to others. And so partially it's looking at how he understood what it meant to be human. And that's both at the individual level, as we are searching to know ourselves and others, right, as social creatures. But he also writes a lot about society, culture. I mean, his massive City of God is really looking at how we relate to one another through the political civitas kind of, in our broader culture. And even there's this restlessness and how we relate to one another. And you also see that dynamic going on with social media and, of course, now in the world with being informed by kind of fast speed information exchange, how that also has impacted the way we relate to one another, call it our civic relations, and even what we call the common good. It's kind of shifting that. So he's thinking at both the individual level and he's thinking at the societal level, and he's thinking about what it means to be human. And sometimes it's actually helpful to go outside of your culture and your time, right? So then you can come back. It gives you that kind of critical lens to then look at where we are today. The other issue, and fundamentally this is part of the title of the book, right, is called Restlessness and Belonging, Augustinian Wisdom for the Digital Empire. And this idea of empire, like he's writing his famous City of God in the midst of the Roman Empire. So I'm kind of doing a interesting parallel, not perfect parallel, but if Roman Empire was the world in which he swam, the world in which we swim today is the digital empire. Which, interestingly, in some ways has more power than some nation states, you might argue, at least in a way that the adherents, people who participate, right, there's the population that's involved, it's global, and its influence, we might argue.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about the ways that our phones and our relationship with our phones shape who we are and sort of hack into us. As I like the way that you phrase that, because I think one of the abiding pieces of kind of what it means to be human is to navigate the relationship between your interior life and the world around you, right? And people sometimes sort of speak and write as if it was, the Romantic poets who first came up with the idea of like interiority and like deeply reflecting on what's going on sort of inside of you and expressing that. And it seems to me, that's absurd. You read back in the Psalms, my favorite Psalm 139 begins, Lord, you have searched me and you know me, when I sit and when I rise, you hem me in behind and before and you have laid your hand on me. There's sort of deep sense of interiority. Before a word is on my lips, you know it completely, oh Lord. This sort of profound relationship with God that is experienced through interiority as well as in relationship with others. And then Augustine coming along and among his famous works, sort of writing his Confessions, sort of narrative of how he came to be a Christian and how this a lot of like interior processing happening on the page, very much in this work that was centuries before our kind of modern tell-all memoirs. And it strikes me that part of the draw of our phones is that they hack that relationship between our interiority and the outside world, because on the one hand, like, I'm completely in control and it's all my own thoughts, and I can kind of receive information and exchange information without anybody else knowing. And also it gives me access to the entire world, people and ideas and places that I've never met and cannot visit or haven't visited. That it's almost like an amping up of both of those, the interiority and the relationship with the world at the same time.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a way in which, I took a course in philosophy at BC, and it was existentialism, and we put Augustine was in that camp, even though he's hundreds of years before, Kierkegaard and Sartre and all these other Camus. And so he was definitely doing this deep work of interiority and self-reflection. And it is this, I call it dialectic, if you use the word, between self and world, self and other, a back and forth. And this really, if you even look at going to psychology and human development, I mean, this is how we learn agency and identity from such a young age. Sherry Turkle writes a lot about, knowing oneself in relationship to, they call it alterity, difference. So you have to go from self to other to back again. And, if you go back into human development and looking at childhood, children and adolescents, I have a child right now who's young. I have 3 boys, and I'm living through it again because we have a 22-month-old. And I'm literally watching a baby learn the world around him. And you learn, right, first, this face-to-face is so significant. We know this from studies in biology, but, the face-to-face, both for how it's building the brain, the networks, and the interaction with the human other, that is actually over time helping to build that sense of self in relationship to the world, in relationship to others. And of course, children are distressed when they don't have attention or don't have a face that's gazing back at them. The child learns their relationship to their siblings. And of course, they'll look in the mirror and at first they don't know that's them. They don't know it's themselves, right? And so that is really how we learn the world, is this back and forth of self and other. And that is how I teach Augustine. That's how I teach the Confessions, is that in many ways, that's what he's doing. He's welcoming us into his interior reflection. And he'll go into this, who am I? Who is God? Right? And then go back to this deeper, enriched self-understanding of who he is then in relationship to the world. It's this constant back and forth. So it's always a relationship of self, neighbor, self, world. But of course, for the believer and for Augustine, it starts with this transcendent. The transcendent, or the relationship to God, opens you up now in a whole new way of knowing the world and knowing yourself. It adds another dynamic, and it's an enriched sense of understanding. And that's what you're watching and learning, or reading and learning with him through the Confessions, which really is an invitation. It's an invitation into his own dialogue, which is really, the term confession is a prayer. So you're doing this deep interior work with him, which is entering into, alongside him, I might say, his prayer to God and his growth in his own self-understanding about who he used to be, who I was, and who I am now. So that rich sense of identity, which comes from his belonging to God.
How do we think about that then, Autumn, in light of the technological change that's happening right now, which if anything could be more disruptive than the change from, no iPhones to iPhones and social media. This sort of shift from, iPhones and social media, but still interacting with humans, albeit through that medium, to a world of large language models that are able to fake humanness in ways that no no non-human thing has been able to before. Sort of into this world where people are having entire conversations with their chatbots, or feeling like they're even in a romantic relationship with their. I mean, I know even the word artificial intelligence is loaded, right? Because it's sort of implying that there is an intelligence we're accessing in the way that I get to access your intelligence in our conversation. When really, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's kind of more like a sophisticated predictive text. When I'm texting you a message and it says, "Oh, you probably want to say, 'Hi, Autumn, how are you this morning?'" Like that. There's more that sense of just copying and replicating than there is creating anything new. How do we reflect on that? How do we navigate that today as we're moving more and more into this age where even what we have got used to experiencing as a uniquely human relationship can be kind of transposed onto or faked by something that's essentially a computer?
It's a great question, and it's the one for our age, right? This isn't just a simple conversation and a simple solution. This is what we're trying to discern, hopefully, as a human community. And the desire is to discern this with wisdom. That's, that's the title of my book. But how do we look at the lens, look at the world that we're in, and question this new technology? And in some ways, we have to diagnose the reality, which is what you were just doing. Like, is this really generative? We could ask, is this really creating new knowledge, or is it actually pattern recognition and predictability, which is what I understand it more to be, very sophisticated and increasingly sophisticated, right? Because it crosses different modalities and transfers between, from my understanding, different forms of knowledge-based technology. But still, there's a way in which a theme in my book is that, if we are image of God, in many ways, what I'm doing is looking all the time now into a new mediator, which is the screen. And of course, all the ways that we now communicate, whether through social media or looking at LLMs. And this new mediator is ironically kind of a copy, in what you're just describing, of myself, which is its own form of predictability, but it's in some ways imaging myself back to me. And it takes me down this, what Andy Crouch would call it's personalization. So it's the algorithms are certainly geared around myself, which is also why they are seductive, if I'm going to use that word. They draw me in because they know my appetites. Go back to Augustine. They know my desire, and they're going to predict the next thing I'm going to want. So my concern as an ethicist is that I'm no longer I moved out of the space, which is, call it, embodied and fleshed, learning a human being that is different than myself. I'm now looking at myself through this technological mode, and I'm actually being drawn more into my own thinking, and seductively, not simply my own thinking, what a corporation and its algorithms are also leading me toward. So here's the empire question, right? Actually, I get to this in my 6th chapter. Fascinatingly, in a world with its modernity and autonomy became so prized, and of course the self is so prized, we're now actually outsourcing the self. We're actually giving the cookies information about myself, which is actually a little bit scary, right? Both to have all this data out there, the clouds that know everything about us. And then I'm also giving it authority to speak back to myself. So I'm actually relinquishing, some call it agency, even authority, to this machine and or the corporations behind these algorithms and the LLM or social media or whatever format thing we're using. And it is leading me. And I'm allowing it to lead me. So I think part of it is diagnosing this reality and say, be aware, first of all, that this is what's happening. And so my concern is both about agency and, of course, the second thing you're talking about, relationality and the relationships we're developing, which are interesting in this day and age. Can I actually have a relationship with a machine? Or is it, ironically, a relationship with myself through this new mode? Of course, it's predicted, so it seems different. But this was the very concern of Joseph Weizenbaum, who created Eliza, from my understanding, right, years ago, who was one of the first reflective kind of having a conversation with a machine that was artificial intelligence that was reflecting back in your conversation to yourself. And he would watch individuals who knew it was a computer, but then be seduced into feeling as if it knew the individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
So these are concerns. Mm-hmm.
It's funny. My second child is called Eliza, and so when I hear the word Eliza, my first thought is this fabulous 13-year-old girl who is so full of energy and life and wonder and curiosity and the exact opposite of something that's just going to reflect me back to me, but instead will kind of meet me and challenge me along the way. It's another young friend who became a Christian just a few years ago. I remember her reflecting shortly after becoming a Christian that like really what human beings need is quite basic and probably hasn't changed for a very, very long time. And an important piece of that is just embodied affectionate relationships. We need to be fed. Yes. We also need to be loved. We need to be held and touched. We need to be talked to. We need to be loved. We need the very basic and utterly beautiful norms of human relationships. And that in some weird ways we've been progressively robbing ourselves of and or starving ourselves of those things as we're putting these other non-human things kind of in that space, and it's more I'm losing grasp of what I want to say here, but it's more troubling than somebody whose primary relationship is with their pet. Because at least with, if you're relating to a dog or a cat, you at least like at some level know, this creature may feel like he or she kind of gets me more than any other human does. And, we're very sort of emotionally in sync. But you also kind of know I'm not relating to somebody who can bounce thoughts back and forth with me. But if we're relating to a computer that's been trained on humans but isn't human, that we have that heady cocktail of human likeness without actual humanity that's going to resist and challenge and delight us in kind of the uniquely human ways.
That's correct.
So as I think about the age that we're moving into, and I'm going to sound a little bit like a doom and gloom kind of elder in this respect, because I think things could actually be about to get much worse than we realize. One of the things that really keeps going around my mind is the fact that if not now, then exceedingly soon, we probably will have no way to distinguish between a video of somebody saying and doing something that is real and one that is AI generated. So I don't know how democracy survives that. I don't know how, many human relationships survive that, because anybody's reputation could be destroyed overnight or preserved when it shouldn't have been, right? Anyone could say, oh, that video wasn't, it looks like me, but it isn't me. Or, I saw Autumn doing this terrible thing. And it's all perfectly captured on video and audio, and it's her voice and it's her hair and it's her face, and you've got no way of telling, of communicating and proving that it isn't you. So I think in some ways we're potentially moving into a more dystopian world than we realize. As a follower of Jesus, and as somebody who believes crazy things like that Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago and that he's coming again one day, we don't know when, and we specifically don't know when because he told us we wouldn't know when, to make all things new, to call his followers back to everlasting life with him and resurrection bodies. Like how does this new digital age of empire cause you to or relate to how you think about the new kingdom that Jesus is bringing in and that he's ultimately going to fulfill, if we Christians are right in our crazy beliefs?
Great questions. and concerning questions. And how do we live and exist in this reality? And where is hope? In some ways, I hear you also, probing at that question. I think part of what and why being religious and or certainly Christian in this context, as we're discussing who we are committed to, is to give you a lens that, again, where you are a stranger to this world, and that strangeness to the world allows you to then hopefully diagnose the world and look at it with new and fresh eyes. That's the desire for wisdom, whether you're a philosopher or you're a theologian, is the question of not just accept the reality that's given, but what is the reality that is? And so with technology, it's a reality that's now being presented to us. And all of these new ways, the deepfakes you're alluding to, the distrust that is already spreading across the internet, right? And that is already challenging democracy because of the ways we don't understand the same narrative, that we don't have the same information and or interpretation of information. And that is really causing distrust. And so I, like you, share a strong concern that culture, society, democracy, and economies are really built on trust. Just like the interpersonal relationship must have trust, in order for our societies to thrive and flourish, they must have some level of trust. If you live in a world where there is only lies, then there is no common good, right? In a sense, you have to have truth, actually. You have to have some kind of shared understanding in order to relate to one another. So I, like you, share concerns about where we're at right now, but also where we could be into the future. As a believer, how do I look to hope? Well, I am told that in this world we will have trouble. So this isn't actually a new thing, in that there's trouble in this world. That's where Augustine is actually comforting to me, in that he's writing the city of God in the midst of, the sack of the Visigoths on Rome. So it's actually in the beginning of the fall of Rome that he's actually writing. So his whole world is being turned upside down as well. It's a scary time for the community. It's a scary time for Rome. And yet he's seeking hope, and where hope is, which is the transcendent God who's beyond time and space, who, because I'm a believer, this is why I'm a believer, entered into time, the incarnation. Christ came in order to show us a new way. And so my hope is, what does it mean to be human, is to see the new way, which is the resurrected Christ, and to follow him, who teaches us not just about the challenges of what it means to live in this world, which is the empire, but the hope of the kingdom, which is every time we align our loves, that's what I call it, our love, our will to God, and begin to practice faith, hope, and love, the fruit of the Spirit, gentleness, kindness, right? Patience, all of these actual virtues and fruit of the Spirit, there's a counterculture, then we're doing the opposite of the distrust, we're building trust. So that's the hope, as well as in the future that the resurrected Christ, I do believe, will return. But our desire is to then live in light of that today. And how do we then help restore, if we might use that language, our communities, hold accountable, and practice ethics for these technologies, whether it's the corporations, both the users, we need to be held, wise and ethical in our use, but we also, as societies, need to discern what are appropriate standards. To use the word regulations, like we should outlaw deepfakes. We should outlaw these things, right? So that we can preserve that which is good and right and true. I always say, as an ethicist, why am I an ethicist? In some ways, it's because I don't always love principles and rules, but I want to know why do we have them? And why do we need them? Well, they're actually for our good. And of course, Augustine says, the greater the loves, essentially the greater the society, the greater the republic, or the greater the city, the greater the loves. So the more virtuous we are, in some ways, the less rules we need, but the less virtuous we are, the more and more we need those regulations that will help hold us in check. And really, in some ways, that gets into law and grace. I mean, really, law is always the guardrail to keep you from going outside the bounds. But grace is what animates us, right? Love is what animates us to live, right? So the more we can give a vision, and that's the hope of why I wrote this book, right? It's to motivate us for a better way to be human, and a better way to relate to one another. I loved, I don't always love extrinsic motivation. I don't always love call it the carrots and sticks. I don't love the sticks that always motivate me, but I love what is the reward, right? The carrot. And the reward is, let's rethink and relook at what it means to be human. And actually the gospel, scripture, historical theology reminds us there is a beautiful way to relate to one another. And this is why I turn to these sources, because I actually want a deeper way to relate to one another, a deeper way to look at each other as image of God, is to take account where we actually want to be in each other's presence. We want to be face to face so that these desires become more, we basically feed these desires and these practices so that we don't rid ourselves of tools, but we put tools, technology back in its place and use it, how I call it, as secondary, third uses, but not primary uses. My primary desire is to be with people, right? And to be in the presence of others and to have a healthy society. And so to also create guardrails so that we can have a healthier society. These are my concerns.
Well, thanks so much, Autumn. That's been really helpful to process all of that with you. If you guys want to grab a copy of Autumn's forthcoming book, its title again is Restlessness and Belonging, Augustinian Wisdom for the Digital Empire. And it should be out by the end of this year, I believe. You guys have been listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast. You can follow us on X or Instagram. You can leave a review on iTunes if you wish. You could subscribe to the YouTube channel. So many digital ways to engage. If you are not yet a follower of Jesus and have been intrigued by anything that Autumn has said, I would just encourage you to try showing up this coming Sunday to a local church. In a world where so much is mediated for us through our phones or through screens one way or another, the embodied experience of singing with, learning alongside, talking with and engaging with other human beings in the unglamorous and ancient structures of church might actually help you rethink some of your daily norms and might point you to the person who Autumn and I ultimately go to church to express our devotion to, who is this one who came to die for love of us, not only to give us face-to-face time with him, but also to give his own life for our sakes.